welcome to another episode of yall-itics, guys.
We're doing things totally different. I mean, you won't notice, unless this podcast doesn't make it. We're recording the audio and the video and everything totally different than usual, and we decided to do that about 15 minutes before we did this.
Yeah, we didn't think it through all the way here. But anyways, listen. I'm still working my way through the six-pack we got in Oak Cliff the other day.
I see.
And I have the Lee Hazy Oswald with us. But before I crack this, and before you crack yours, let's go ahead and bring our guest in, because this is great. Our guest not only wanted to join us for this episode, but also said, listen, I'm going to bring my own beer, too.
Yes, and he's in Houston. It's got to be a Houston beer, right?
It is St. Arnold's.
St. Arnold's, okay. Which one?
Irish Hello.
Oh, nice.
I haven't had that one.
And I've heard of the Irish goodbye. I've never heard of the Irish hello. Do you know what the Irish goodbye?
No, I was thinking of something.
No, it's nothing like that. As far as I understand it, I'm gonna have to look this up now.
Well, don't bring it up if you don't know it for sure. Then.
But no, the Irish goodbye is when you leave a party without saying goodbye to anybody,
or
you leave an event. I do that all the time.
Yeah, constantly doing that.
It's the easiest way to get out.
We have William Taggart with us. He is in Houston, and he is an engineer. And we're getting smart on this podcast today.
Oil and gas.
Where else would he be if he wasn't in Houston, right?
And he's written an interesting book that we're going to get into today. I will say just a quick note about your Oak Cliff beer. This is the longest I think it's ever taken you to get through a six-pack. It's interesting. I am having a lukewarm Moorfield Blonde Ale. This is from Mission, Texas. You
know where Mission is?
5x5 Brewing Company. Of course, it's down in the valley.
Yeah. I think you were with me.
I always know the geography
last time I was there.
in Texas.
And the pronunciation.
I will beat you every time.
Have you Everything's a race together, right? Everything's a race. Have you cracked yours yet, Mr. Taggart?
I'm ahead of you.
He's way ahead.
You're in a pint glass. Oh my gosh, you're way ahead of me. Chilled pint glass.
He's already poured it and had 3 sips. Mr. Taggart, you wrote a book that is, it's an interesting take on different problems that America faces, and it's called Fixing America, an engineer's solution to our social, cultural, and political problems. And, upon reading through this, it really is clearly put together by an engineer. It's a different way of thinking of problem. Why do you laugh when I say that, Jason?
Well, was that an insult?
No. I mean, it's
clearly put together by an engineer.
You can just tell. It's a different way of approaching problems. It's a different way of thinking about problems. Yeah. Wouldn't you agree, William?
Yeah. No, definitely. I see the political discussion going on, and we talk about the personalities and what did he say and what did she say. But this book ignores all that, and it goes to the structural problems. It's kind of like when you buy a house, everybody looks at what color are the walls and what school district are we in. But when you go to borrow the money, the lender wants an inspection report on the house. Well, this is your inspection report on America, and it's where are our structural problems. And that's what I approached it as. I tried to take the whole Republican, Democrat idea out of it, take the emotion out of it, and go, what is the history? What's the data? How did we get here? And that was the big question.
Well, that said, let me ask you 2 questions here. Number one, where do you fall politically? Because people are going to ask that immediately. But secondly, what does an engineer know about all these problems facing this country?
Right. So let me give you those answers. So I was raised Republican. About 2004, when the whole Iraq thing was going on, I went, I'm done with the Republican Party, and I stepped away. But I've never become a Democrat because I don't agree with some of the Democratic philosophy. So I fall in the middle. I'm in that middle America group that, a pox on both their houses. I'm not a Republican and I'm not a Democrat. Yeah. And what happened was about 4 years ago, I got out of oil and gas. I'd worked solid for 32 years and I went, you know what, I'm done. And I stepped away. And the big thing is when you're in oil and gas, climate change, you hear it's a hoax. And then you hear we're burning the planet down, and you don't know which it is. So, sitting in the house with nothing to do, I started pulling down lots and lots of data. The National Weather Service has tons of temperature data that you can pull in, analyze, and start to try and understand, is climate change real? And the answer is yes, it's real, but not like we've been thinking. It's not uniform. Some ultra-rural areas are not showing much climate change. All the urban areas do show climate change. So that got me thinking and said, okay, well, what's going on here? And then one issue led into another, which led into another. And it's kind of like, you pull a string on a piece of clothing and it just keeps coming. You just keep looking into where is this going to take you. And at one point I finally I just told my wife, I said, okay, this has got to be a book. I got to turn it into a book.
Well, was she glad to hear that, or did she say, put it away?
She has been extremely patient, putting up with me doing this and being.
She sounds a lot like Mrs. Wheeler too, very patient.
Yeah, I don't know how patient she is, but yes, I know what you mean.
The patience is now being paid back because she's writing her own book, which I'm now helping her to get done.
Interesting.
On a completely different subject.
You know, you brought up climate change. It's one of the topics that you discuss in this, and I found it interesting because you were talking about different experiences. You know, we always talk about shared experiences that we have as Americans, but we see things very differently a lot of times, and part of the reason for that is because what we're experiencing is totally different. And you were talking about this divide between a lot of urban places and rural places, and I had never thought about it in those terms where, you know, in some of these rural areas, you really just don't see a lot of these effects of climate change that you might be seeing in some urban areas, and especially along the coast and so forth. And that's an interesting perspective as to why, part of the reason why I think people can't find agreement on some of these big issues.
Well, one of the things you got to look at, and I did address this in a chapter about rural America, is rural America is seeing their main streets dead. They've got some Dollar General or Family Dollar store on the outskirts that has put the little mom and pop businesses out and put them out of business. It's owned by some foreign, big corporation somewhere else. As a result, they're seeing that impact and they're seeing a decline in their population, but they're not seeing climate change. So when we try to get them all fired up about climate change, that's not their concern. Their concern is the fact that there's no jobs, businesses are drying up, and it's a big issue with them. We can see that in the demographics. I think one of the big issues we have in America that we're ignoring is that the demographics have changed. Our rural, especially in Texas, half our ultra rural counties in Texas have lost population in the last 10 years. Whereas we've had massive growth in the urban and suburban centers.
Well, I think about that, and I wanted to talk about rural America for a moment here. This has been going on for 40, 50 years, though. I think about the Bruce Springsteen song, My Hometown, and he's talking about, these jobs are drying up, they're not coming back. But you kind of put a finer point on it, if you'll allow me some corporate speak here for a moment. You say that the divide in America is not necessarily Republican and Democratic, but it's more rural versus urban. What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is the globalization that happened took jobs away from rural America, and we've had this massive improvement in the lifestyle of urban America. And that's what we're seeing a lot of the impacts in these rural areas. They've lost a lot of they've lost the corporations, the factories, whatever was helping them to maintain a job base. And now they're having a big impact. That's having a big impact to them. At the same time, we have all this cheap material, appliances, cars, everything coming in from foreign locations that's allowing the urban people to have a better lifestyle. So it's like the East Coast, the West Coast, and the big urban areas have benefited from globalization, but the rural areas haven't. And I really think that Trump's election was the rural areas coming back and telling us, hey, pay attention to us. We're having problems. And
Well,
I think
what does that say, with an election coming up here, what does it say about November, do you think?
Don't ask me that question. I don't have enough data to make an answer. It's going to be a question.
That's an engineer's answer. It's a perfect engineering answer, by the way.
But if you can look at it, look at what the Biden administration has done. They've funded building chip plants in rural areas. They've funded stuff. There's a company called Forum Energy that's building a giant, what they call an iron air battery in West Virginia. I mean, they're investing in those areas, and those areas are seeing some turnaround. So I think it is a move by us to address that issue. But there's still a lot of other big issues hanging out there. The national debt, the fact that we haven't balanced a budget since 2001, or 2000 actually. So we still have these other issues going on. And I think we've got to come to grips with that.
You know, you talk a lot about economics, and that spreads over into other issues like abortion. I don't think that, you know, there's always a lot of discussion about the things that intersect with the issue of abortion. And you really talk a lot in there about how poverty and abortion intersect, and you know, you make some recommendations in there. And I would think that, you know, there's going to be liberals and conservatives that are going to be, you know, maybe equally appeased and offended or angered by some of your suggestions as they go through the book.
Some of the most vehement emails I've gotten have been from left-leaning people who are like, "Oh, you're completely wrong on this," and I'm like, "No, if you look at the data, it shows you a different picture." One of the things I would go to with the people on the right, I'd go and ask them about, for as abortion goes, when you look at the foreign countries that are sending people to the U.S., that are crossing our border illegally and claiming asylum, they all come from countries that ban abortion, have high population density, and are very poor and have low levels of education. And then we talk about banning abortion here. When we look at the demographics of the world and split it into the countries that allow abortion and the countries that ban abortion, the differences are amazing as far as economics, as far as education, as far as poverty. Countries that ban abortion have a poverty level almost twice as high as countries that don't ban abortion. So I think that's what you're talking about, is that economics tie in. Poverty was an amazing topic because it linked across so many different things. Once you start looking at poverty, it ties into why we have poor educational results, why we have healthcare problems, why we have all these other problems. Lyndon Johnson.
You even extrapolate with guns.
Yes.
We have murder rates and murder numbers here, but you say that the issue is not necessarily the number of guns. It has to do more with poverty. You break that down in a lot of categories.
Yeah, exactly, because it all links together. Lyndon Johnson declared a war on poverty in the 1960s, and I'm sorry, as far as I'm concerned, we've lost. We haven't gotten poverty addressed. And until we do seriously address poverty, we can't expect our education or our healthcare, our crime, or anything like that to turn around, because it all links back to poverty.
What's the answer on poverty then? I mean, that was 60 years ago when LBJ declared that.
There's a lot of talk about what's called universal basic income. It's an idea where everybody gets X number of dollars, like $1,000 a month. I don't look at a universal solution because I don't think you can do that. It's too big a number, and for people making $100,000, $200,000 a year, they don't need that money. It'd be nice to have, but they don't need it. So I look at like a basic income where you give money to the poor people. Anybody below $24,000 a year is getting $1,000 a month to pull them up out of poverty. Now the problem is, where do you get that money from? And I'm afraid it's going to have to come out of the rich.
Well, Houston, as you know, Houston and Austin have both
Houston
tried that.
They're trying it on small scale, yeah.
Sure, and they're using federal money for that, but they've had tremendous pushback from
the state.
Those on the right, from Attorney General Ken Paxton and others.
Yep.
I mean, could that really grow legs?
So what they've done is, actually, Alaska has a sovereign wealth fund from the oil industry, and they give, I think it's about $500 a month or $400 a month, I can't remember the exact number, to everybody in Alaska. So there's a number of the Indian tribes that have casinos. They do the same thing. They give like a dividend to all their members. And those are like experiments that we can look at. And what they've seen is there's a reduction in poverty. There's an improvement in quality of life. So we've got examples where this system has been tried and appears to have worked. Now, the fact that we don't want to do it, that the Republican leadership is blocking it, is a basic idea of you don't want to give money away to the poor. And when I started this book, I had that same idea because I was raised Republican. But it was going through the book and trying to get my mind around it that I realized that my view of poverty was out of step with the data and the analysis and the history. I mean, the next time you do an Uber, talk to the driver. Ask him how many jobs he's working. Because that's the thing, is we have a lot of people now that are in that $20,000 to $30,000 a year range, and they're having to work multiple jobs. The idea of the poor being these people that lay around or they're the criminals, that's no longer the case. We've got a lot of working poor, and they're struggling, and that's being seen in a lot of the results. There's a lot of dissatisfaction as a result of that.
William, you talk about history and analysis and data, and you say that what's needed is policies that are based on facts and supported by logic. Why do you think it is, or I assume that in your estimation right now, a lot of our politics is not, based in facts and supported by logic? Is that your feeling, and why is it?
So the thing is, we vote emotionally. Most of America does not vote on a cold, hard logic. And as a result, we see all these events where people are saying, oh, there's this mob coming across the border, and there's, all the culture war issues that we continue to use to divide us, which are actually a small part of the whole problem that we have. And it's because people vote more on emotion than they do on logic.
But people are going
That's
to tell you that
unfortunate.
they vote on logic. If you were to ask most people, I think they would say that they cast a vote based on logic.
Yeah, but they don't. That's the problem. They go into emotional. You listen to some of these focus group discussions that they have where the person's like, oh, I like how that person looks and I like how this. It's like a popularity contest in high school. And that's a shame because it's now we have a $35 trillion debt because we've let the popular guys run the bank of the United States. This is not good. It's a hard thing to get your mind around. One of the things I kept coming back to was there are hard decisions we need to make. We got to balance the budget because we can't keep going deeper in debt. The only way to do that is raise taxes, because if you look at cutting things, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, payment on the national debt, you've just exceeded your tax incomes just on those items. So you're going to have to do something with taxes. That doesn't mean you don't need to cut down on spending, but to do it without putting the elderly or the poor into a really bad position, you've got to do some raising of taxes. And when you look at the economy, the money is in the top 1%. You're going to have to raise taxes on the top 1% to balance the budget. And people are not going to like that.
Yeah, you're putting out some fighting words there for a lot of politicians.
Yeah.
Well,
And that's the reality.
and just to make sure I'm clear, I mean, to what Jason's saying and to what you're saying as well, you said you were a Republican, you're more independent now. These sound like some pretty progressive ideas, though.
It's not as progressive as you think. There's actually a couple of the chapters are a little on the conservative side, which is what got me in trouble with the people on the left. But it's a question of if you tell me you want to balance the budget, then I've got to cut spending or I got to raise taxes. And the only place to raise the taxes is on the top 1%, because if you adjust taxes for inflation, the people between $0 and about $200,000 a year, they're paying about the same level of taxes that their grandparents paid in the 1960s. So you can't really raise taxes on them. And that's one of the interesting things where the Republicans talk about a sales tax, they talk about a tariff, they talk about stuff like that, because that's a non-progressive tax. It's a tax on all of us in an equal manner, or in a proportional manner that would hurt the lower class and the middle class, but would not hurt the rich as much. But the reality is, if you're looking for excess cash, it's in the top 1%. So,
Wheeler, you're top 1% guys. So
Yeah, that's me.
we can take some excess cash if you need some.
Been outed as a top 1%er. I wanted to ask you, when you're putting this book together, when you're putting this book out there, who is it intended for? Who do you think reads this? Who do you want to read this?
a good friend of mine read the book and he said this was a conversation starter, not a conversation ender. And it was because he said that this book gave him the information to discuss topics intelligently, to look at a topic and understand it. So this is gauged more toward middle America. It's gauged toward people who want to understand the issues that are affecting us and get away from these culture war problems and understand what we're doing and what we're getting into. In my mind, I'm very concerned about the future and less about the whole Republican-Democrat thing and more about if we keep running up the national debt, at what point does the economy break?
Some of the numbers and the facts and the figures that you put in this, though, you know that people are going to argue with that because it might go counter to what they've heard or what they think they know. I noticed there were a lot of footnotes in there, and I'm curious how much of a process that was to link people all the way back to where you found the information.
So one of the things I did, because I have an engineering background, is I went to the primary data source. I went to the Federal Reserve, and they've got all this data on the economy and on that. You go to the base data. You don't let other people interpret it for you. You go directly to the source of the data and you work from there. I've got one of the links on the website for the book, and actually I mentioned the website in the book, links you to the data tables. You can go look at the data tables that I generated and check them out yourself. See if you agree, see if you don't agree. But I did look at it that way. And it was a question of going, instead of listening to what people, I got tired of people telling me what to feel. And I'm like, I want to go look at the data. I want to go look at the source and understand where it's coming from. And that was interesting.
I think a lot of people are probably in that situation right now. So you don't just cover the lightning rod issues like abortion and border and the economy, but you also talk about some Texas-specific issues such as the electricity grid, such as ERCOT, and the situations we've seen there
Yes.
with having to, cut back on electricity. One chapter of your book is about the Texas duck curve. I've
That's
never heard of that, and that must be
Yeah.
an engineering thing. So what is that?
So that's actually part of the blog that I issued out that I wrote and I'm continuing to write. And so what you have is you have what's called the duck curve in California, which is you take the net demand and you subtract solar and wind, and this is the amount of electricity that the non-renewables have to generate. And as that solar and wind gets more stronger, for California, in the middle of the day, they go to almost negative electricity. They have excess electricity. Well, the Texas duck curve looks a little different. And in fact, we've developed this crest, this bump between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. when, as the sun's going down before the wind picks up at night, we've got this gap. And that gap caused us to have some insane electricity prices last year. We were seeing $1,000, $2,000 megawatt charges per hour. And that made August the most expensive month last year for electricity. Well, this year, we had an even bigger crest of the duck. But we didn't have those crazy electricity prices. We've had more batteries, we had lower natural gas prices. So we got through this. We also had a cooler summer. Surprisingly enough, in the Texas region, we were cooler this year than we were last year. So we got through okay. We didn't have as many crisis moments as we did last year. But my thing is I'm a little worried about the following years. Because what's going on right now is ERCOT and the Texas Public Utility Commission, at the instruction of the legislature, has got this bill, this Texas Energy Fund, to fund more natural gas power plants. My only question is, where are you going to get the natural gas from? Natural gas prices are low. As a result, natural gas drillers are pulling back. They're laying off rigs. They don't want to drill any more wells until prices go up. So that means the natural gas supply peaked in December 2023, and it's been declining ever since. We're building more liquefied natural gas plants. There's still a lot under construction. So my question is, where are you going to get the gas? I think we're going to see a problem in the next 5 or 10 years. And it's a problem of, we have both the Department of Energy and the Texas legislature and the Texas Public Utility Commission that are looking at the short term. But who's taking the long-term view? That's my question, and that's my concern.
I wanted to ask you here, this book has been out, I think, since the beginning of this year.
Yeah.
Have you heard from any leaders or any policymakers out there who might have picked this thing up and looked at it and thought, this is a different way of looking at this? Have you heard from any of those, or even from some regular folks who say that this has changed how they think about issues in a big way?
Well, I've got a lot of regular folks who've contacted me. I've had a lot of positive reviews from people. There's a couple professional book review companies, Kirkus Reviews, Book Trib. They love the book. They gave it a high rating. But we're not having we're not seeing that from the leaders. The book is, it's available through Amazon. It's available through Barnes & Noble. We had it locally at a couple bookstores in Houston and in San Antonio, but it's not been, we're not getting this major push from a major publisher. We don't have a major publisher behind me. So as a result, I'm sending books where I can, and I'm speaking where I can, and trying to get this in front of people.
And if you had to choose, what would be the one takeaway that you would hope that people get from this book? I mean, it covers a lot of ground, but if you had to boil it down to one takeaway,
the thing is, the point I make in the book is, we have a situation where politicians are demonizing the other side. They're saying, don't listen to those people, they're evil. Those are your fellow Americans. You need to listen to them. You need to talk with them. We need to get to a point where we've pretty much driven all the moderates out of Congress, the moderate Republicans, the moderate Democrats. We don't have many of them left. We need those people to come back, because those were the people that could reach across the aisle and make a sensible deal and not have some bill that's worried about some crazy idea. We need sensible solutions. We need a sensible solution on the border. We need a balanced budget. We need a plain, simple idea on how to get our country turned around. But we need the people to do that will be the problem solvers and that will work with others. I think we need moderates. One of the things I've been working with is I'm trying to work with moderate political parties, third parties, but it's hard to get a third party up and running in Texas. The laws are very stacked against us. And I think that's what we need is we're going to need that third party. You know, you look right now, the Federal Election Commission, they're split, I think it's 4-4, Republican, Democrat. Nobody can get anything done at the FEC. If one campaign breaks the law, their side just says, no, we're not going to look at that. So we're not getting any progress on that. I think we're at a point where the fact that we've got the Republicans and Democrats moving farther to the political extremes on both sides, it's creating a massive gap in the middle that, you know, at some point it's got to get filled. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'm curious as well. You talked about, I think it was abortion. You said that when looking at the cold hard facts there and the data, that you changed your view on it. I can't remember exactly which issue it was, but what
Yeah.
else? What else did these cold hard facts change your opinion on?
So I went into the chapter on guns thinking we needed to ban assault weapons and all that. And then when I'm starting to look at the data, it was clear that that murder was tied to poverty. When you looked at suicides, U.S. has the highest gun suicide rate, but when you look at overall suicides, we're very comparable with Europe. So, and you can get, if you get a couple of these experts and pin them into a corner, they'll admit that, yeah, confiscating guns wouldn't change the overall suicide rate. It just changes what tool was used to try and commit suicide. So once you're past that point, you start to realize guns is not that big of a deal. And really, you know, the mass murders and everything, that's less a factor of the guns being prevalent in our society and more a factor of the hate that we've been spewing and the anger and the rage that has been coming out that we've been letting to go through society. So on guns, we do need gun control. We do need to limit, you know, nobody needs a 100-round clip for an assault weapon. We don't need those. There's a reasonable set of gun control rules that can be enacted, that should be enacted. And we need to get to that point.
But you know, people say, but the Second Amendment.
Well, the Second Amendment is fun. We can keep the Second Amendment. We can obey the Second Amendment. But we do regulate machine guns and cannons and artillery. So we just got to get to the point where we understand that we need to regulate large clips. One of the things I say in the book is we need to have it where, yeah, you can carry a pistol, you can carry a shotgun, you can carry a bolt-action rifle around, but a semi-automatic weapon you don't get to carry around because we don't need people walking up to a political assembly with multiple semi-automatic weapons. There's been a number of incidents where police have said they were outgunned, and that's just not acceptable. So we do need to look at that.
Again, all through here, I can hear people bringing up disagreements, whether they be progressives or conservatives. It seems like though what you're trying to do is just provoke thought, provoke a conversation.
Yes, we need to have the conversations. We need to have the discussions, and that's why the whole thing where I go back to, don't let a politician tell you the other side is evil. Go sit down with them and talk, and let's find that common ground, that middle ground that we can agree on and get a common policy to implement. But yeah, definitely, we can't let people drive us to the extremes.
And you've had right and left who have had some issues with your book, huh?
Yeah.
That should tell you you're somewhere right in the middle or right on track then.
Yeah, it's been good. I think most of the reviews have been extremely positive. The few negative ones have again come from the far right and the far left who have issues with what I've said.
Well, the book is called Fixing America, an Engineer's Solution to Our Social, Cultural, and Political Problems. William Taggart is the author. He is a Texan. He is a Houstonian, and was kind enough to walk us through this. And you bring up a good point, and maybe the title of this podcast. We don't vote on cold, hard logic, and we probably should rather than emotion.
Yeah. William, thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen.